Hi everyone and welcome to Week 7, Part 1, Rococo Art and the 18th Century. In our discussion of the art of the 18th century, we will expand beyond Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. Other places in the Western world, such as France, England, and the United States, became more influential and important to the development of art during the 1700s. The events of the 18th century were radical in many ways on political and social fronts. What follows is a brief description of several of these important events and trends. Art historical trends are signposts of these major turning points, but not always in ways that we expect. The Age of Enlightenment. Following on the heels of many philosophical and scientific advances of the 17th century, the 18th century is singularly defined for many as the era of the Enlightenment. Led by figures such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Enlightenment was a complicated ideology made out of a collection of various ideals, some of which seemed incongruous or in conflict with each other. At the heart of the Enlightenment was the idea that politicians, artists, scientists, philosophers, and other scholars should hold reason above everything else. Rational thought and science were held far above religion. But at the same time, many Enlightenment philosophers felt emotion was suppressed by society, and that this was the root of most of the world's problems. According to Enlightenment ideals, social conventions, such as those surrounding marriage, child-rearing, worship, and business, corrupted the naturally good nature of humans. We'll see how Enlightenment ideals affect the visual arts within this module. The Industrial Revolution. The 18th century is considered to be the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a term used to describe an array of technological advances in production and living and the social effects of those advances. There's a good essay on the Industrial Revolution linked in the module. Business and life in general in the West changed greatly during the 18th century, with larger numbers of people than ever coming to the cities to work in industry. This was a time when the middle class started to approach the aristocracy in power, influence, and wealth, and when poorer classes had options outside of farming, the land of nobility. On the other hand, it was also a time when working conditions were extraordinarily poor. People worked without a minimum wage or benefits, and child labor was accepted and even necessary for a family to get by in the city. The American and French Revolutions. The late 18th century was marked by these two revolutions. Both wars sought to unyoke a nation from what were perceived to be oppressive monarchies. Both wars were attempts to create a government by the people and for the people. The revolutions were, even more importantly, challenges to the divine right to rule, claimed by monarchies all over the world. These revolutions challenged what they called a sacred circle, an Enlightenment concept that saw monarchic rule and religious power as interdependent on one another. The French Revolution is largely regarded as something of a failure, as, like the Haitian Revolution, it did not play out as most would have wanted. Slavery and the Haitian Revolution. Throughout Europe, the kidnapping or purchase of African people for the purpose of slavery accelerated during the 18th century. While slavery was abolished by France and England by the end of the 18th century, it continued in the United States. Although many hundreds of revolts were attempted in the Americas, in 1789 the only successful revolt by slaves occurred in Haiti. However, as in France, Haiti was left with a problematic system. The subsequent government was caste-based and not exactly egalitarian in the manner intended. The rise of the Royal Academies. In terms of its direct effect on the visual arts, the most importance of these is the rise of the Royal Academy, especially in France, England, and Italy. Some Royal Academies had already been in existence for some time. But in the 18th century, these academies accrued power within the art world. While art production was scarcely an egalitarian career path in the past, the influence of the academies made art an altogether elite pursuit. In order to learn how to become a great artist, and in order to get access to those who could help you in your career, you would already have had to achieve a measure of success according to your birth, class, race, and gender. Admission to the academy was certainly not based entirely in merit. When women were admitted to the academy, they were forbidden to take the most important developmental classes. This fact is even observable in the art of the time. In this piece by Johann Zoffany, you can see that the only two female members of the Royal Academy couldn't even be painted into an imaginary gathering of all the academicians. They weren't allowed to be, even in fantasy, in the same room with the male models. The textbook's inset on the academies on page 926 presents a short description of the availability or lack thereof of positions in the academy to women. While the workshop system had allowed some women artists to grow their careers, the academies literally limited the number of women who could participate, and sometimes banned them altogether. Indeed, women seeking membership in the Royal Academy must have already achieved great success on par with her elders on the Assembly or Admissions Board. You can read more about the development of the Royal Academies in London and Paris on page 926. In this academy system, rather than the market determining the style and the course of art, the academy set the guidelines for art production. Most art historians today regard these guidelines as stifling and too prescriptive. Academy guidelines seem to have determined the style preferred by the clientele, rather than the other way around, with the clientele determining the style they liked. The Academy deemed some subjects and media unsuitable. Furthermore, a hierarchy within the Academy meant that each artist had his or her own restrictions. Only those who best adhered to the Academy's standards, and who presumably had some political capital as well, were able to create history paintings, for example. Academic standards were largely rooted in an overappreciation of art of the Renaissance and antiquity, a concept that we introduced in a previous module when we talked about the Renaissance. Academics especially appreciated the works of Raphael and the sculpture of the ancient Greco-Roman world. Artists were taught through replication of Renaissance and antique work. They were actively discouraged from purely observational drawing or painting. While an academy artist might paint or draw from a model, he, not she, women could not work from models, was expected to perfect what he saw based on knowledge of Raphael and the ancients. The exhibition of artwork was also controlled by the academicians. Artwork was displayed annually or biannually in salons. You can see in the print on the screen one of those salons, where the artwork was made available for view and purchase by only the wealthiest and best connected members of society. Most artwork was created for private viewing at homes rather than public view in a church or city plaza, as has been the case previously. It would be incorrect, however, to say that the sale of art was any more exclusionary than it had been, outside the Netherlands, of course. The difference is that in the 18th century, most commissions came from the newly wealthy bourgeoisie, the upper middle class, rather than the extreme upper echelons of society represented by royalty and the church. Many still wonder, why is this change? Why do we have this change in the way art was made? Why did the Academy flourish in the 18th century and not before? And why in the 19th century does the Academy subsequently fall from public favor once again? These are questions I ask you to consider as we view artwork from this period and try to see it in its context. In the rest of this lecture, we will consider the century's two most prominent styles, both of them essentially created within the Academy: Rococo and Neoclassicism. Rococo is a style that coincides with the shift of control over the arts to the Royal Academies of France, London, and Rome. The term Rococo is believed to be derived from the words Baroque, meaning decorative, and roquet, referring to a type of shell as well as an ornate decorative technique. As discussed previously, unlike in the previous century when the art market and social circumstances drove subject matter and technique, academies set the standards and created what we call academic styles. It is in this environment that we find the Rococo style. The crowning achievement of any academic artist was a commission for a portrait or a history painting, which depicted recognizable moments from antiquity or biblical times. But Academy artists gained many sales of less grandiose subjects to upper-class aristocratic patrons, like this one. While Rococo is, as a style, could be and was sometimes applied to history paintings, its characteristics are more closely associated with these artworks made for the newly wealthy. In interior decoration, Rococo is exemplified by the Salon de la Princesse on page 907 of your textbook. Ornate woodwork and plaster covered in gold leaf. In painting in particular, Rococo artists used pastel and candy-like colors, shades of pinks, greens, and blues. Artists drew in billowing and curving shapes. Most paintings conveyed a general light-hearted, even frivolous mood. French academic artist Jean-Antoine Watteau admired the work of Venetian and Netherlandish painters, and perhaps this is apparent in some of his work. His L'Un de Front reminds us of Dutch and Flemish Memento Mori. He's a foolish young lover without a care in the world, for now. Like many Rococo works, it's also an opportunity to display gorgeous clothing and the beauty of youth. Pilgrimage to Cythera, with its Venus theme, may remind us more of Venice. Watteau's Academy admission piece, Pilgrimage, presents to us the importance of the theme of romantic love in Rococo art. In its beautiful silks and satins and delicate pastel scenery, it's also emblematic of Rococo visual style. It's also a great example of the highly prescriptive nature of the Academy. In order to accept the work, the Academy had to create a new category of painting. Watteau's signboard of Gersant is another example that exemplifies Rococo's visual style and subject matter. Watteau created this piece while ill. He was dying of tuberculosis for an art dealer, Edmé Francois Gersant. The work was to serve as an advertising sign for the gallery. It displays Rococo preference for beautiful surfaces and serves as a memento mori. You can see a discussion of this on pages 908 to 909 of your book. But it also reveals something about Rococo subject matter. You will see that in this early stage, Rococo artists an, mirror an image of their patrons. Rococo art frequently shows the upper class bourgeoisie, who are the art buying public, doing things that aristocrats are believed to do or expected to do. In Rococo art, upper class people have trysts, pick flowers, attend to children, or, as the case in signboard, buy art. It's been argued that in this way, during the Rococo period, art may either be descriptive or prescriptive, or both, of the behavior of the upper class in a way it had not been previously. We'll see more evidence for the prescriptive interpretation in the section on Naturalist Rococo. Francois Boucher was a highly successful academic artist who became the first painter to the King of France and a member of the royal court. Boucher created some paintings with erotic subjects for the king and other patrons, including some that had a mythological theme. The Triumph of Venus, seen here, and Cupid a Captive display a lot of very softly formed flesh along with the curving shapes and candy-like colors typical of Rococo. Both paintings also display the Rococo artist's ability to imply motion with those typically curving shapes. But perhaps the most iconically associated with the French Rococo is Jean-Honoré Fragonard. His work, The Swing, seen here, represents for many the carefree and light-hearted attitude of Rococo style, especially toward the depiction of romantic encounters. Along with deftly applying the Rococo style characteristics of color and shaping and illicit subject matter, Fragonard also creates a unique and exceptional composition. The large, relatively empty space at the top of the artwork, along with the strongly diagonally oriented composition, combine to display Fragonard's innovation in spite of the Academy's stifling atmosphere. And here you can see another less well-known piece by Fragonard of two lovers meeting secretly. Rosalba Carriera, along with other Venetian artists, was seen by her European patrons as living in a place rife with antiquity and art history. She drew portraits of art patrons on holiday to Italy with pastels, a medium that was quite popular in the 18th century. Her portraits also fulfill Rococo style expectations with soft colors and lines. Her subjects, as expected, are depicted with idealized, youthful features. As in painting, pastel artists such as Carrera also focused on accurate depictions of material goods such as the hat and coat of Charles Sackville. Naturalist Rococo. A return to nature was the subject of many of Enlightenment philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's writings. Rousseau and other Enlightenment figures believed that society corrupted humankind's innately good nature. Some Rococo artists clearly adopted this theme in their works, and even seemed to draw and paint from observation rather than nature. These artists and their works are often referred to as Naturalist Rococo. Some Naturalist Rococo artists seem on first viewing to abandon the Rococo celebration of the upper middle class. In Grace at the Table, seen here, and in The Governess, seen here, Jean-Simeon Chardin exalts the quiet virtues of the middle and lower classes. In Jean-Baptiste Greux's work, we see it even more clearly, as Naturalist Rococo artists place the working class on a pedestal, as do presumably their patrons. A branch of Enlightenment philosophy positions the lower classes as somehow less corrupted by society. Elite patrons of artwork such as this believe that, unlike themselves, lower and middle class people don't care about money or social status, and instead make decisions such as whom to marry for reasons of love, like in Village Bride, instead of succumbing to social pressures. This was, of course, a very misguided view, but a sympathetic and popular one. Occasionally, the lower classes were depicted in a humanistic, even negative light, as in The Drunken Cobbler. While Rococo retained popularity throughout the 18th century, many artists reacted against its obsession with the upper classes. William Hogarth in particular was a satirical artist who created series of prints and paintings that lampooned the upper classes. In this age of enlightenment, works that poked fun at courtly and unnatural activities of the upper classes were especially popular in England. Hogarth's Marriage à la Mode series is a narrative about the woes of the upper class arranged marriage. It was transferred from painting to print, which allowed Hogarth's message to be broadcast to a large number of people. The sale of the prints also benefited his pocketbook without having to part with the original paintings. You can read an explanation of the first painting in the Marriage à la Mode series on pages 922 to 923. You can view all of the images in this series along with interpretations at the National Gallery website linked in the lecture. Other naturalist Rococo artists simply sought to paint frankly and plainly from nature. English artist Thomas Gainsborough's portrait of Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan depicts his subject in a manner that would have been unthinkable in the earlier days of Rococo. Rather than presenting us a woman in full dress and rich fabrics and in an artificial setting, Mrs. Sheridan is out in nature. She is shown in a relatively simple gown, with her hair natural hair down. It almost seems as if the artist is attempting to equate his subject with nature, as her hair and clothing swirl with the same energy as the foliage and sky. Naturalist Rococo artist Marie-Louise Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun also concentrated on the natural beauty of her aristocratic subjects. Without the glittery artifice of earlier Rococo, Vigée-Lebrun and Gainsborough still idealized their figures, but now that idealization takes on an identification with the natural rather than upper-class society. Compare French academic and court artist Vigée-Lebrun's 1779 and 1783 portraits of Marie Antoinette. The 1779 portrait seems highly formal. They're in a formal room and a very, very formal gown. Compare that to the portrait of 1783, en chemise as it's called, or in muslin. The portrait, probably intended to make Marie Antoinette appear closer to nature and therefore the middle class, was rejected by the public as being too informal for an image of a queen. While no one at the time should have been shocked that the queen wore muslin dresses, it does seem that the naturalist Rococo style wasn't a good fit for those above the upper middle class. Also, it is likely that at this time, Marie Antoinette probably couldn't do anything right in the eyes of the French public. As court painter to the Queen, Vigée Lebrun undoubtedly did her part to try to improve the Queen's image. After the en chemise portrait backfired, Vigée Lebrun attempted a more subdued Enlightenment-style naturalism. In 1787, her Marie Antoinette and her children, but Vigée Lebrun fashions her subject in the so-called good mother theme. The Enlightenment concept of the good mother was in a similar vein to Enlightenment ideas about marriage. Just as Enlightenment thinkers believed that people should marry for love rather than money or status, mothers were encouraged to take care of and express love for their children. While certainly most upper-class people loved their children, before the Enlightenment, children were treated like little adults. Coddling children was discouraged. But Enlightenment ideas held that children were different from adults, with emotional needs that should be catered to by a mother, not a nanny. Upper-class women were encouraged to nurse and raise their own children, a practice that before the Enlightenment was socially rarely acceptable among the upper classes of Europe. Furthermore, according to Enlightenment ideals, not only should women perform these duties themselves, they should want to perform them, if they are good mothers. In the 1787 painting, Marie Antoinette is radiant and surrounded by her children who appear to adore her. Her son gestures at an empty cradle. This is meant to encourage the viewer to sympathize with Marie Antoinette as she had recently lost a child. The good mother theme, along with the reminder of Marie Antoinette's humanity, was no doubt effective. Trends against Rococo will intensify as neoclassicism gains popularity in the academies in the later part of the 18th century. Rococo came to represent the aristocracy and the monarchy, especially in France. In fact, as court painter, Marie-Louise Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun, that's quite a long name, isn't it, had to flee the country after the arrest of the doomed French royal family. She traveled extensively and worked constantly. She was even elected to the Academy of St. Luke in Rome. She was finally able to return to France under the reign of Napoleon. One last Rococo artist that we want to look at is Adelaide Labille-Guiard. She and her female contemporary, Vigée Lebrun, were admitted to the Royal Academy in 1783. Both had previously belonged to the Academy of St. Luc in Paris, which had been forced to close its doors by the official Royal Academy. Although she was commissioned for many royal works, Labille-Guiard was a French Revolution sympathizer, and after the Revolution, she exhibited works that depicted revolutionary heroes. Let's see if I can find one for you. There we have Robespierre by Adelaide Labille-Guiard. And here are some of her royal family portraits like Madame Victoire and Madame de Selve. In the self-portrait that you're seeing on the screen, Labille-Guiard looks formal and confident. An antique-style bust depicting her father in the background demonstrates her association with the Academy. While some female students, like Labille-Guiard, were taught in the studios of master artists, they were rarely recorded, for it was seen as subversive to teach women art. Labille-Guiard, though, makes her position on this known by painting two female students into the painting, looking over her shoulder. Despite trends against it, Rococo continued to be influential on the emerging neoclassical and Romantic styles, never really departing until after the French Revolution of 1789.